The night William Bellmont tried to burn the family Bible, his daughter Mary Agnes watched from the shadows of the upstairs hallway. The flames in the fireplace cast dancing shadows across his face as he tore pages from the sacred book, feeding them one by one to the fire. But he didn't know that Mary Agnes had already found what he was trying to destroy. Hidden in her bedroom, wrapped in a silk handkerchief, was a single page that would unravel 16 years of carefully constructed lies. This is the true story of how a young woman from Louisville's elite discovered she was not who she believed herself to be. Louisville, Kentucky, spring of 1851. Mary Agnes Bellmont was 16 years old and preparing for her debut into society. She was the only child of William and Catherine Bellmont, owners of Riverside Plantation, one of the largest tobacco-growing estates along the Ohio River. With her pale skin, green eyes, and light brown hair, Mary Agnes was considered one of the most beautiful young women in Louisville society. Her future seemed predetermined: marriage to a wealthy man, a life of comfort and respectability, children who would carry on the Bellmont name. But Mary Agnes had always felt like something was wrong. The feeling had started years earlier, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly when. It was in the way her mother, Catherine, sometimes looked at her with an expression that wasn't quite love, wasn't quite resentment, but something cold and distant. It was in the way certain servants whispered and fell silent when she entered a room. It was in the strange fact that there were no portraits of her mother pregnant, no detailed stories of her birth, no baby clothes carefully preserved as family heirlooms. And it was in the way her father watched Josephine. Josephine was 34 years old in 1851. She worked as the plantation's primary seamstress, creating and mending clothes for both the family and the enslaved workers. She was known for her extraordinary skill with needle and thread, her quiet dignity, and her unusual education. Unlike most enslaved people at Riverside, Josephine could read and write, skills she had learned from a previous owner before being sold to the Bellmonts 16 years earlier. Mary Agnes had always felt drawn to Josephine in a way she couldn't explain. As a child, she had spent hours in the sewing room, watching Josephine work, listening to her hum old songs, feeling a sense of peace she never experienced anywhere else in the big house. Catherine had discouraged these visits, calling them inappropriate, but Mary Agnes had continued them in secret. It was during one of these visits in March of 1851 that Mary Agnes noticed something that would change everything. Josephine was mending one of Mary Agnes's dresses when the young woman looked down at their hands working side by side. The similarity was striking. They had the same long, slender fingers, the same oval-shaped nails, the same small scar on the right thumb from a sewing needle accident. "Josephine," Mary Agnes asked suddenly, "where did you get that scar?" The seamstress's hand stilled. "From a needle, miss, when I was learning to sew as a girl." "I have the same scar," Mary Agnes said quietly, "in the exact same place. My mother told me I got it when I was 5 years old, learning embroidery." Josephine didn't respond, but Mary Agnes saw something flash across her face. Fear, or perhaps recognition. That night, Mary Agnes couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the small things that had never quite made sense. She remembered being 7 years old and overhearing 2 elderly enslaved women talking in the kitchen. "That child got Joe's eyes," one had said. "Hush your mouth," the other had replied. "You want to get us all sold south?" At the time, Mary Agnes hadn't understood. Now the memory took on a different meaning. Over the following weeks, Mary Agnes began to investigate her own history. She started carefully, asking seemingly innocent questions. She asked her mother about her birth, about what she had been like as a baby. Catherine's answers were always vague, always brief, always followed by a change of subject. "You were a beautiful baby." Very quiet. "Now we need to discuss your dress for the Henderson ball." Mary Agnes searched the house for baby clothes, christening gowns, anything that would confirm her existence as Catherine's daughter. She found nothing. When she asked about this, her mother said they had been lost in a fire years ago, but there had been no fire at Riverside Plantation. Mary Agnes had lived there her entire life. She would have remembered a fire. In April, Mary Agnes made a bold decision. She went to the county courthouse in Louisville, claiming she needed a copy of her birth record for her debut documentation. The clerk searched the registry books for 1835, the year she had been told she was born. There was no record of Mary Agnes Bellmont's birth. Perhaps it was registered late, the clerk suggested, or in another county. But Mary Agnes knew the truth was something far more complicated. She began watching her father more closely. William Bellmont was 52 years old, a prominent businessman and plantation owner. He was respected in Louisville society, a church deacon, a man who spoke eloquently about honor and family values. But Mary Agnes noticed the way he looked at Josephine when he thought no one was watching. It wasn't the look of a master toward his property, it was something else entirely. Guilt, perhaps, or longing, or fear. In May, Mary Agnes found the family Bible. She had been searching her father's study while he was away in town, looking for anything that might give her answers. The Bible was in a locked drawer of his desk. Mary Agnes had learned to pick simple locks as a child, a skill she had acquired from playing with one of the enslaved children, much to her mother's horror. Inside the Bible, in the family record section where births, marriages, and deaths were traditionally recorded, Mary Agnes found something extraordinary. There were 2 entries for her birth, written in different hands. The first, in her father's handwriting, stated, Mary Agnes Bellmont, born March 12, 1835, to William and Catherine Bellmont. But underneath, partially scratched out but still legible, was another entry in a different hand. Mary Agnes, born March 12, 1835, to Josephine at Riverside Plantation. Mary Agnes's hands trembled as she read the words again and again. Beneath that entry, also scratched out, were the words, Father, William Bellmont. The room seemed to spin. Mary Agnes sat down heavily in her father's chair, the Bible open in her lap, trying to process what she had just discovered. She was Josephine's daughter, her father's daughter, born to an enslaved woman, which meant, according to the laws of Kentucky and every other slave state, she was legally enslaved herself. The doctrine of partus sequitur ventrum, that which is brought forth follows the womb, was the fundamental law of slavery. A child's status followed the mother's status. If your mother was enslaved, you were enslaved, regardless of who your father was. Mary Agnes had been living as a free white woman, preparing for her debut into society, when by law she should have been enslaved. The enormity of the deception crashed over her. Her entire life was a lie. Her identity, her place in society, her future, everything she had believed about herself was built on a foundation of fraud. She carefully tore out the page with the birth entries, folded it and hid it in her bedroom. Then she returned the Bible to its drawer, her mind racing with questions she didn't know how to answer. That evening at dinner, Mary Agnes studied her parents with new eyes. Catherine barely looked at her as always, but now Mary Agnes understood why. Catherine wasn't her mother. Catherine had never been her mother. Had Catherine known from the beginning? Had she agreed to raise another woman's child as her own? Or had William deceived her as well? And what about Josephine? Had she willingly given up her daughter to secure a better life for her? Or had Mary Agnes been taken from her? Mary Agnes needed answers, but she knew she had to be careful. If her father discovered that she knew the truth, there was no telling what he might do. 2 days later, Mary Agnes found a moment alone with Josephine in the sewing room. She closed the door carefully behind her and turned to face the woman who was, she now knew, her mother. "I know," Mary Agnes said simply. Josephine's needle stilled. She didn't ask what Mary Agnes knew. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. She simply closed her eyes and a single tear rolled down her cheek. "How did you find out?" Josephine asked quietly. "The family Bible. There were 2 birth entries for me." Josephine nodded slowly. "I wondered if he had kept any record. I begged him to burn everything, to erase every trace. But men like him, they need to write things down. They need to make it official, even the things they want to hide." "Tell me what happened," Mary Agnes said, sitting down across from Josephine. "Tell me the truth." And so Josephine told her. She had been 20 years old when William Bellmont purchased her in 1833. She had been educated, skilled, valuable, William had taken notice of her immediately. The relationship that developed was not consensual, though Josephine spoke of it in careful, measured words that made Mary Agnes understand the complexity of a situation where one person owned another. When Josephine became pregnant in 1834, Catherine Bellmont had been unable to have children of her own. The couple had been married for 10 years without producing an heir. William saw an opportunity. He proposed a plan to Catherine. They would claim the baby as their own. Josephine would give birth in secret, attended only by a midwife who could be trusted or threatened into silence. Catherine would pretend to be pregnant, padding her dresses, avoiding public appearances. When the baby was born, they would announce it as their child. Catherine had agreed, perhaps out of desperation for a child, perhaps because she had no choice, perhaps because she understood that refusing her husband in this matter might mean losing her position entirely. Mary Agnes was born on March 12, 1835. Josephine was allowed to nurse her for only 3 days before the baby was taken away and given to Catherine to raise as her own. "Did you ever want to tell me?" Mary Agnes asked, tears streaming down her face. "Every day," Josephine said, her own tears falling freely now. "Every single day. But what good would it have done? To tell you would have destroyed your life. As long as you didn't know, as long as everyone believed you were Catherine's daughter, you were free. You had a future. You had everything I could never give you." "But you're my mother," Mary Agnes said. "You're my mother, and I've been living in the same house with you for 16 years, and I called another woman mother, while you sewed my clothes and served my meals and watched me grow up from a distance." "I got to watch you grow up," Josephine said softly. "Many enslaved mothers don't even get that. Their children are sold away before they can walk. I got to see you every day. I got to know you were safe, well-fed, educated, loved. Even if you didn't know who I was, I knew who you were. I knew every moment of your life, and I was grateful for that, even though it broke my heart every single day." The two women sat in silence, holding hands across the small table in the sewing room, tears falling on the fabric between them. "What will you do now?" Josephine asked finally. "Now that you know." "I don't know," Mary Agnes admitted. "If the truth comes out, if anyone knows that my mother is enslaved, I could be enslaved too. Everything I have, everything I am, could be taken away." "Then you must never tell anyone," Josephine said urgently. "You must destroy whatever evidence you found. You must live your life as if this conversation never happened. You must be Mary Agnes Bellmont, daughter of William and Catherine and nothing else." But Mary Agnes shook her head. "How can I do that? How can I go to balls and marry some wealthy man and live in a big house, knowing that my own mother is enslaved, knowing that I have brothers and sisters in the slave quarters?" She paused. "Do I have brothers and sisters?" Josephine hesitated, then nodded. "2 half-brothers, Josephine's sons. They work in the tobacco fields. Your father has never acknowledged them." Mary Agnes felt sick. She had siblings she had never known, living as slaves on her father's plantation. That night, William Bellmont discovered that someone had picked the lock on his desk drawer. He checked the family Bible and saw immediately that the page with the birth records was missing. The next morning, Mary Agnes was awakened by shouting. She went to her window and saw her father in the yard, burning papers in a large metal drum. She recognized the family Bible among the items being destroyed. She dressed quickly and went downstairs. Her father was in his study, methodically going through every drawer, every box, destroying anything that might contain information about Mary Agnes's true parentage. "Father," Mary Agnes said from the doorway. William spun around, his face pale. "Mary Agnes, go to your room." "I know the truth," she said quietly. The color drained completely from William's face. "What did you say?" "I know that Josephine is my mother. I found the birth records before you burned them." For a long moment, William said nothing. Then he crossed the room and closed the door behind his daughter. "How long have you known?" he asked. "A few weeks. I have the page from the Bible. I have proof." William's expression hardened. "Give it to me now." "No. Mary Agnes, you don't understand what you're asking for. If anyone finds out the truth about your birth, you will lose everything. Your name, your position, your future. Under the law, you are legally enslaved. Do you understand that? You could be sold. You could be sent to the fields. You could be beaten, raped, worked to death. Everything I have done, every lie I have told has been to protect you from that fate. To protect me? Mary Agnes said, her voice rising. Or to protect yourself? You raped my mother. You took her child. You destroyed her life and mine. I gave you a life, and William shouted. I gave you freedom, education, opportunity. I could have sold you the day you were born. I could have let you grow up in the slave quarters. Instead, I raised you as my daughter. I gave you everything. You gave me a lie, Mary Agnes said, and now I don't know who I am. William's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You are Mary Agnes Bellmont. That is who you are. That is who you will continue to be. And if you ever speak of this again to anyone, I will have Josephine sold so far south you will never see her again. Do you understand me? It was a threat he could easily carry out. Mary Agnes understood, in that moment, the absolute power her father held over both her and her mother. I understand, she said quietly, but understanding and accepting were not the same thing. Over the following months, Mary Agnes went through the motions of her life. She attended balls and social events. She smiled and danced and made polite conversation, but inside, she was planning. She began documenting everything she could remember, writing down dates, names, details about her birth and Josephine's history. She hid these writings in a tin box buried in the garden. She made careful copies of documents she found in her father's study when he was away. She gathered evidence piece by piece, not knowing what she would do with it, but understanding that knowledge was power. In November of 1851, Mary Agnes received a proposal of marriage from Thomas Henderson, the son of one of Louisville's wealthiest families. It was exactly the kind of match her father had always wanted for her. Catherine was delighted. William was pleased. The wedding was planned for the following spring. But Mary Agnes had other plans. In December, she went to see a lawyer named Robert Jameson, a man known for taking unusual cases. She told him everything. She showed him the page from the family Bible that she had carefully preserved. She explained the laws around maternal descent and slavery. Jameson listened carefully, then shook his head. Miss Bellmont, even if everything you're saying is true, pursuing this legally would be disastrous for you. You would be confirming your own enslaved status. Your father could legally sell you. You would have no rights, no property, no protection under the law. But Josephine, Mary Agnes said, if I'm legally enslaved and my father is my owner, couldn't I theoretically purchase my own freedom and then purchase Josephine's freedom? Jameson frowned. Enslaved people cannot own property, including money. They cannot enter into legal contracts. So no, you could not purchase your own freedom. But what if someone else purchased us? What if someone bought both of us and immediately freed us? That would be legal, Jameson admitted, but who would do such a thing? And how would you arrange it without your father finding out? Mary Agnes had been thinking about this for weeks. Thomas Henderson, my fiancé. His family opposes slavery. They're Quakers who only recently began conforming to society's expectations to maintain their business interests. If I tell him the truth, if I ask him to help us, he might agree. It was an enormous gamble. Thomas could reject her, report her to her father, or simply refuse to involve himself in such a scandalous situation. But Mary Agnes had come to know him well during their courtship. She believed he was a good man who would help if he understood the full situation. In January of 1852, Mary Agnes told Thomas Henderson the truth about her parentage. To her amazement and relief, he believed her, and more than that, he agreed to help. Thomas met with Robert Jameson and proposed a plan. He would purchase both Mary Agnes and Josephine from William Bellmont, claiming he wanted to gift them to Mary Agnes as wedding presents. It was not uncommon for wealthy men to give enslaved servants to their new wives. Once the purchase was complete and the papers were signed, Thomas would immediately file manumission papers, legally freeing both women. But there was a problem. For Thomas to purchase Mary Agnes and Josephine, William would have to admit that they were his property. He would have to acknowledge, at least in the legal documents, that Mary Agnes was enslaved. When Thomas approached William with the proposal, framing it as a generous wedding gift he wanted to arrange, William's reaction was violent. Absolutely not. Mary Agnes is my daughter, not my property. This conversation is over. "Mr. Bellmont," Thomas said carefully, "I have seen certain documents. I know the truth about Mary Agnes's birth. I want to help resolve this situation in a way that protects everyone involved. But if you refuse, I may have to take this information to the courts." It was a polite threat, but a threat nonetheless. William understood that he was cornered. If this went to court, the scandal would destroy the family. But if he agreed to Thomas's plan, he would lose control over both Mary Agnes and Josephine. After 3 days of negotiation, William agreed to the sale. On January 23, 1852, he signed papers selling Mary Agnes Bellmont and Josephine to Thomas Henderson for the sum of $2,000. The transaction was recorded in the county records. For one brief moment in legal history, Mary Agnes Bellmont, the young woman who had been preparing for her debut into Louisville society, was officially classified as enslaved property. The same day, Thomas Henderson filed manumission papers for both women, granting them their freedom. Mary Agnes and Josephine were now legally free. The scandal that followed was devastating for the Bellmont family. William tried to deny everything, but the legal records were clear. The story spread through Louisville society like wildfire. Catherine Bellmont became a recluse, never leaving the house. William's business associates distanced themselves from him. The family's reputation was destroyed. Mary Agnes and Thomas did not marry. Thomas released Mary Agnes from their engagement, understanding that she needed time to process everything that had happened and build a new life for herself. They remained friends, but Mary Agnes knew she could not marry into society, could not pretend to be something she was not. Instead, Mary Agnes and Josephine left Kentucky together. They traveled to Cincinnati, Ohio, just across the river, where they settled in a community of free black people and abolitionists. Josephine taught Mary Agnes everything about her heritage, her culture, her history. Mary Agnes, for the first time in her life, began to understand who she really was. Not Mary Agnes Bellmont, daughter of the elite, but Mary Agnes, daughter of Josephine, a free woman with her own story, her own strength, her own identity. In 1854, Mary Agnes published a memoir titled The Daughter of Two Worlds under a pseudonym. The book detailed her experience discovering her true parentage and fighting for her freedom. It became one of the lesser-known but powerful narratives in the abolitionist movement, used to illustrate the complexities of race and slavery in border states like Kentucky. Mary Agnes never saw her father again. William Bellmont died in 1856, his obituary making no mention of the scandal that had destroyed his final years. Catherine died 2 years later. Josephine lived until 1873, long enough to see the end of slavery and the beginning of Reconstruction. She spent her final years teaching formerly enslaved people to read and write, passing on the education she had fought so hard to obtain. Mary Agnes lived until 1902. She never married, dedicating her life instead to education and civil rights work. She established schools for black children in Ohio and Indiana. She mentored young women, both black and white, teaching them that identity is not determined by society's classifications, but by one's own understanding of truth and justice. In her final interview, given at age 67 to a newspaper reporter, Mary Agnes was asked if she regretted forcing the truth into the open, given everything it had cost her. "I lived the first 16 years of my life as a lie," she said. "I have lived the last 51 years as my authentic self. There is no comparison. Freedom is not just about legal status. It is about knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone else define that for you. My father tried to burn the truth, but truth cannot be destroyed by fire. It will always find a way to the surface." The page from the Bellmont family Bible, the one Mary Agnes had torn out that day in her father's study, is now preserved in the Kentucky Historical Society. Visitors can see both entries, the lie and the truth, written one above the other, a permanent record of the deception and the revelation that changed one young woman's life forever. Mary Agnes's story remains a powerful reminder that in antebellum America, identity was often a matter of documentation, deception, and power. How many other children were raised as white when they were legally black? How many families hid similar secrets? How many truths were successfully burned before they could be discovered? We will never know, but we know Mary Agnes's truth, preserved in her own words, passed down through generations, a testament to the courage it takes to claim your own identity in a world determined to deny it.